This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
But first, I welcome our first speaker, James Baker, who's a curator in the digital research team at the British Library, as well as being a historian of 18th century Britain, a fellow of the Software Sustainability Institute, and an honorary research fellow at the School of History at the University of Kent. And James is going to talk a bit big picture, I suspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the digital research team is a team that set out about 4 years ago at the British Library to kind of think about more expansive problems and different uses of our digital content. I always say that it's about sort of not just using our digital content as though it's in a form yoked to print, but actually going beyond forms yoked to print and thinking about more, I won't use the word disruptive, we'll just talk about why we don't use the word disruptive, but more kind of expansive and different ways of approaching the digital collections that we have. That's a nice picture of the British Library. Can't see that well, just the light. But just one thing I wanted to say, of course, is that we are also a physical environment still and will remain so. Our chief exec was only talking this week about the fact that even though we're moving more and more to digital resources and scholars are moving more to digital resources, that the library as a physical space is even more important perhaps than ever was, and actually is growing in terms of numbers and use. So what do our team do, this digital research team? I'm going to sort of move through some things quite quickly. I'll be sitting outside after these talks at the end, so people can talk to me afterwards as well if they want to go into more depth. But the first thing we do obviously is collaborate. These are a bunch of folks from University College London Computer Science, a bunch of students who we work with to try and think up different approaches to presenting content to scholars, particularly from my perspective, historians, to think about more interesting, different ways they can actually approach using our collections. We write stuff. This is a lesson I wrote with a colleague in Canada, in Milligan, about how you can use the Unix command line to count and mine your research data. Very simple, very easy, step-by-step process that takes you through how to do that and why you might want to do it. And we do a lot with postgraduate communities, you guys. This is a snap from last year's Doctoral Open Day. We have a specific digital scholarship open day at the BL, and we've got 70 odd people from a wide variety of humanities, social science disciplines coming along. Our second one is this Friday, and I think there are still tickets. So if anyone's free this Friday, wants to come to the BL, it costs $5, and you get a day of learning more than just this 10-minute slot about digital research at the BL. Why do we do all this? Well, there's lots of things changing in the real world. We know that. Outside of academic circles, you've got things like the Google Ngram Viewer. Has anyone seen the Ngram Viewer before? You search billions of words, hundreds of thousands of works, and it can pull back simple lists over time of word frequencies. Now, there are many problems with this I'm not going to go into, but it pulls out things that are kind of not that unexpected. So if we put in prison *_noun, we get the 10 most common nouns that come after prison in the whole corpus from the year 2000 to 1800. And we see obsession with prison disciplines in the 1850s, that's not entirely unexpected. We see things about prison camps in the 1940s, not unexpected. Apparently today we care about prison sentences. There are problems with this, we need to dig into this and go into the data, but these are things challenging us from the outside. And so scholars have thought things like this. A lone scholar cannot read, much less make sense of millions of newspaper pages, but they can use a computer to help them do so. This is what a newspaper looks like, but this is what a bit of newspaper sitting underneath your nice screen interface looks like at the British Library at the back end. If you could see this closer, you'd see that we get down for a lot of words that actually spelled correctly. That's not that common. And then we get to one that says satis break factory, where the machine has thought that satis is a separate word from factory. I could have showed you a terrible one when none of those words were right in the slightest, but that would have just killed your desire to use digital resources ever again for searching. But there's this kind of interplay between the physical and the digital and the actual file that sits beneath it, which historians can increasingly use. A nice example of which is a guy who worked with us called Bob Nicholson, a historian at Edge Hill University, who is interested in Victorian humour. He was using algorithmic analysis to pull out examples of humour from newspapers, and soon I think they'll be posted up on the Mechanical Comedian once a day, a random joke from our Victorian archives. An interesting way of playing with the data and understanding different connections. But it's not all about data. Two of my favourite projects have nothing to do with this mass digitisation that's happened in the last 20 odd years. One is a project, the Dirty Books Project. It uses, it's not this manuscript, but it uses a medieval prayer book of sorts, and it scans the bottom right-hand corner of the page to try and find where there's sort of bits of human oil and sort of signals of where people have touched the thing, and then to try and extrapolate from that a sense of what pages of this thing we'll use more often. It's very simple, but it's applying technology to physical things rather than trying to use digital tools to understand data. And another, and I won't play a video from this because the sound isn't working and I haven't got much time, but I would encourage you to go and have a look at the Virtual St Paul's Cross project. My slides are already on SlideShare, by the way, so you'll be able to see them later. But what this does is not do a virtual environment where you can see and walk around and it's a bit like a game. Instead, they recreated a sound experience of actually being at medieval St Paul's and hearing a sermon from different places. What they're trying to understand was, what does the unamplified sermon sound like from different places? And why would loads of people go to a big open space where one man is talking if they couldn't hear him? And what they found was that the pre-fire St Paul's actually has got really good acoustics. But when you fill it with more people, that acoustics becomes problematic. And so they're sort of playing around with trying to understand experience through using actors, those strange little rooms where you project and there's no actual reflection of your sound. So really great project. So nothing to do with like data in that sense. Nonetheless, I also often say that the British Library is now becoming a place full of data as much as a place full of books. And that's not me sort of lying to you. I think that's eminently true. We capture masses and masses of data now. We take snapshots of the whole UK web, whatever that actually means. But that means that we have billions of web pages suddenly augmenting our 150 odd million physical items that we have. A massive explosion of our collections that wasn't there before. We also collect these, hard disks. If you think about it, not many of you write letters, but most of you probably actually research letters. If you're going to research year 2000s onwards, you're going to be researching stuff that's on these. And these things don't just leave traces of documents, they leave traces of stuff you download, stuff you delete, the days you access things, the days you edited things. And suddenly there's a raft of data appearing on these devices that can be used for historical purposes. And undoubtedly contemporary historians are going to really need these very, very quickly as we move forward. And we release data. One of the things we did last year was take 60-odd thousand historic books that we digitised and search through them all for all the images, images which weren't catalogued by the image, catalogued just by their place in the book, and stick them up on Flickr for open use under open licence. And there's been some really interesting creative uses come out of all that, including people adding a whole load of geodata to them. This is a sort of medieval Leo Belgicus, and someone geo-tagged it and warped it to fit perfectly in the Belgiums and Netherlands area. I think it's a really lovely indication that actually didn't need to be warped that much. It's a pretty good map. So very quickly, there's all that. So there's this kind of change in scholarship going on. There's types of collections that BL are pushing out, their digital collections, and there's people starting to interact with them. More specifically, what can we do for you? Well, we hold a number of events. One of them, we're holding a VAT camp next month. A VAT camp is the Humanities and Technology camp. That just means a whole bunch of people who care about technology and humanities get in a room together, they vote for the sessions that they'd rather see during the course of the day, and it's not just a bunch of talks, some of them are interactive, it's free, and I'd encourage you to sign up, come along. We've got 30 odd people already, and we're probably going to fit 60 in. We run panel discussions that touch on issues that go beyond just the subject of history, but do bring in historians as part of these wider discussions about scholarship and digital. We've got one coming up on the 19th of February, which is about the web of rights. It's about what changes for us as citizens in the age of the web. And one of the speakers there is Martin Eve, who's recently published on open access and the humanities. Not a historian, but if you're interested in open access, the problems related to that, and scholarly labour in particular within the process of publication, you may find that interesting. This is a slide from our previous event, which was on video games and heritage collections, because we're finding increasingly that people who build video games want bits of heritage collections, and making connections between them and different audiences, scholars, whatever, who come along to these events. And finally, we run a project called British Library Labs at the library. BL Labs runs events on one hand, also runs competitions, and there'll be two competitions actually appearing at the end of this month, which I can't say too much about, but the competitions are for anybody who wants to use British Library digital collections to come up with an idea and to work with us making that idea a reality in many cases. In some cases it's people with technical skills need our stuff, in sometimes it's people without technical skills need those skills to make their project better, and it's open to everybody, whether you're a student, scholar, entrepreneur, whatever. I'll leave it there. The slides are on SlideShare and our blog is BL Digital Scholarship. So thank you.